Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Ree, and in this video we're going to be looking at the endocrine system. So in lab this week, we're going to be drawing out a lot of these organs and what they look like, and I'm going to be going through a lot of the things that I'm going to go through in this video as well. So I'm not going to draw everything out today. I'm just going to focus on some of the main ideas that you need to know for this lab and that we will be going over again in lab as well. So this is a very inclusive group of glands that are related to the endocrine system. Endocrine system is all about hormones. The ones that we're going to be focusing on is the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the parathyroid, the thyroid, a little bit of the thymus, but not much. Thymus is more involved in growth in childhood and not involved in the adult life. So we're going to focus on adult glands, the adrenal glands, a little bit of the pancreas, kidneys, we're going to wait for the urinary system, a little bit of testes and ovaries, but we'll get more into that in the genitourinary lab as well. So our big contenders are those five, a little bit of the pancreas too. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about each of them and what each of them do. So in the endocrine system essentially will send a hormone, whatever that hormone is. Kind of the pattern for it is a hormone is produced somewhere. That hormone is going to go into the bloodstream. And from the bloodstream, it's going to go to its target. So that is how messages are sent. So it's kind of they pack it up, send in the blood, and then the blood will send it to its target and create some type of physiologic change in the body. So for each of these organs, you need to know what hormones are produced there. 2, what hormones does it secrete? Secrete means send it into the bloodstream. And 3, kind of, what does it do? Now, when we go to what does it do, we're going to talk more about what does it do when you're in physiology. So we're really focused on produced and secrete. Produced, we need to know what cells make it, right? What are the names of the hormones? So there's kind of a lot to learn, and that's why I'm going to go through some of the basics here very quickly, and then in lab we're going to go through each of them as well. So if we start right off the bat, the main organizer, the main thing that regulates the endocrine system is the hypothalamus. We talked about the hypothalamus when we discussed central nervous system, and we looked at the diencephalon. So this is located in the floor of the third ventricle of the diencephalon. The hypothalamus is going to create a few different proteins, including regulatory proteins. So the regulatory proteins are either going to say yes or say no to the other endocrine organs to make their hormones. So, for example, if I had, say, the thyroid, okay, so here's my thyroid. Thyroid makes our T3 and T4. So that's our thyroid. It makes thyroxine, T3 and T4. Our hypothalamus up here in our brain is going to say to the pituitary, which we'll talk about in a second, yes, make it. Or no, don't make it. And so this will not be created. This message won't be sent down through this kind of feed without the hypothalamus saying, yep, you can do it, and no, you cannot do it. And I'll go through feedback loops a little bit in lab in more detail. But it's regulatory, so it has regulatory hormones. It also creates 2 specific hormones. So the 2 hormones it makes is our oxytocin, as well as our vasopressin is another term for it. Or ADH. So those are kind of the 2 names you might see for ADH or vasopressin. And ADH is going to involve the kidneys, and we'll talk more of that when we get into the urinary system. But it is going to make it so that we keep water in our system and that we don't excrete the water in urine. So it kind of keeps water inside is what vasopressin or ADH. It's called vasopressin because when I keep water inside, it's going to constrict or vasopress my vasculature. Oxytocin is going to be a hormone that's related to bonding. Also, it is the hormone that causes delivery of a child. So that is going to be what's released when it's time to deliver a child. So it's our bonding, our delivery hormone. So those are created in the hypothalamus. But these two, vasopressin and oxytocin, are not secreted here. They are secreted by the posterior pituitary. And I'll explain that. Pituitary. I'll explain that more when we're in lab. But that kind of brings me down. So for my hypothalamus, below my hypothalamus, still in my diencephalon, I have the pituitary gland. Now the pituitary gland has two parts. So it kind of has a bigger front and a smaller back. The back is my posterior pituitary. And that is what I just said is going to secrete oxytocin and ADH. Posterior pituitary does not make any hormones. It does not create or produce any. It only secretes. It just holds it. And then it sends it into the bloodstream. So there's no production. It's made above in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is up here. So then that sends it down there. Now the anterior pituitary on this other side creates a lot of things. So there are two types of cells that we find in our anterior pituitary. We have our basophils, and we have our acidophils. And a color, so they get their name because when you stain them, the basophils come out a bluish color, and the acidophils come out in a pinker color. The basophils are going to produce 4 different hormones, and how you can remember it is basophil sounds kind of like a base, and the base of something, like a house, is usually flat. So FLAT, that stands for follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. That is going to stimulate the follicles either in the testes or the ovaries, so creating eggs or creating sperm. The L stands for luteinizing hormone, LH. Luteinizing hormone is responsible for the production of our estrogen. Well, it kind of helps with production of estrogen, but it also assists in the release of an egg in a woman. Our A here is going to stand for ACTH, which is adenocorticotropic hormone. We'll talk more about that, but that is involved in the release of our adrenal gland hormones. And then TSH. TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. So my hypothalamus, let me get my little pointer. So my hypothalamus up here produces TRH, thyroid regulating hormone. TRH tells anterior pituitary, you can make TSH, and then TSH sends it to the thyroid and says, thyroid, you can make thyroxine, T3, T4. That's how the thyroid kind of regulatory. Again, I'll draw all this out in lab. So those are the 4 that basophils make. The acidophils don't make as many. The acidophils are my GPA. So I remember the A for acidophil, that just stands for acidophil. So that's how I remember the acidophil. The acidophil makes 2. It makes growth hormone. And it makes prolactin. Growth hormone helps with a lot of different regulatory things with uses of glucose, as well as how we grow with our bones and our muscle. And prolactin is going to be involved in the production of milk. So those are all of our hormones of our pituitary. All the hormones created in the pituitary gland are only created in the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary does not create hormones. It secretes the hormones made by the hypothalamus. So because I kind of started up here, and we can kind of go back here, right? We talked about this, we talked about this. Let's talk about the thyroid, because I was just talking about how we have TRH, TSH, and then we have our thyroid. So our thyroid is located right in the front of the trachea. It is bilobed, and the thing that connects it in the middle, this is called the isthmus. Now, if we were to zoom in and look at how a thyroid is designed, it kind of has these follicles that look like this in it. And in the middle, it has thyroglobulin, which is one of the components that it needs to create thyroxine. And then also has cells on the outer area. And it has a bunch of these. So it'll have multiple follicles. And then it'll have these cells on the outer. Both of these different cells are creating different hormones. So the cells in our follicle, so here's my follicle. The cells that surround my follicle are called follicular cells. And my follicular cells are what create our thyroglobulin, which becomes our thyroxine. Thyroxine is typically called T3, T4. I'll explain in lab a little bit of the biochemistry of what T3 versus T4 means, but essentially it means one has one more iodine than the other. Now these cells on the outside are outside of them. We typically call them parafollicular, outside of the follicle. And parafollicular cells here create calcitonin. Calcitonin, what it does is it likes to keep calcium in the bone. So calcitonin helps keep calcium in the bone, and we're going to talk kind of more about that in a second, but that's where I kind of remember calcitonin. Now, calcitonin has something that acts against it. It does the opposite of what it does. So this brings calcium in. How do I take calcium out? If I go on the back of the thyroid, I have these I have 4 small little glands. These glands on the back of the thyroid are called my parathyroid. And my parathyroids are these small little parasites you could think of, right, on the back of my thyroid. And my parathyroid is going to have 2 types of cells, but essentially we only have to talk about one of them. So the 2 cells that we find in here are chief cells and oxyphils. Oxyphils, they have yet to figure out kind of what they actually do. Their function is not really seen. So we don't worry about it. They just exist. So don't worry about that. The chief cell, though, the chief cell is going to create parathyroid hormone. Very original hormone. It's just named by the gland. Parathyroid hormone is going to do the opposite of what calcitonin does. Opposites attract. We'll talk more about that in lab. So that's parathyroid. So we talk about thyroid, parathyroid, pituitary, hypothalamus. From there, we're going to go to the adrenal glands. Now the adrenals. Now the adrenals are found on top of the kidneys. So if here's my kidney, my adrenal gland is this kind of triangular thing on top of that. And my adrenal gland, if I zoomed in on that triangle, my adrenal gland is kind of triangular and it's broken into 2 parts. The outer part we call my adrenal medulla, and the inner part we call the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortex is going to have these special cells that create catecholamines. I'm not going to spell this right. Catecholamines. Catecholamines are things like epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, epinephrine and norepinephrine are involved in our autonomic nervous system. Our sympathetics are all related with the adrenal cortex. So when we talk about the sympathetic system, one of the targets of the sympathetic system is the adrenal cortex. The adrenal medulla is split into 3 zones. So if I just zoom into that, there are 3 zones of it. We're going to say that this is the outer, so the outermost, this is my inner layer. And when I look at my 3 zones of my, sorry guys, I just realized I had a brain, I switched these. The medulla is on the inside. I don't know what I was thinking. Cortex is on the outside. Medulla. Okay. I was like, all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, that's wrong. Okay, so the adrenal medulla is on the inside and the adrenal cortex is on the outside. Sorry about that. And so adrenal medulla is related to the autonomic nervous system. All right, back onto our regular. The cortex on the outside has 3 parts. The most outer part of our cortex is called zona glomerulosa. This is going to create mineral corticoids, which the big one you're going to need to know is aldosterone. Aldosterone is going to do kind of the opposite of what ADH did from the hypothalamus. The next zone is my zona fasciculata. And zona fasciculata is going to create glucocorticoids. Specifically, the one you need to know is cortisol. Cortisol you might have heard of before. That's our kind of stress hormone. It's involved with regulating glucose metabolism. And then our most inner zone is my zona reticulatus. And that is going to create androgens. And androgens is the fancy name for our sex hormones. And so we are going to create testosterone as well as estrogen, but more testosterone than estrogen in the reticularis. We'll talk how all of those kind of interrelate there. So our last thing to talk about out of this list is just our pancreas. Now our pancreas has a lot of different things that it's involved in. So there are 2 that I want to focus on. Let's see if I have room right here. We'll just put the pancreas up here. So when we look at the pancreas, we'll kind of see, especially we'll see it when we go to the digestive system, but it's kind of shaped like this. And it is found sitting right behind or kind of a little on top of the stomach. Now the 2 cells that you need to know that are in here are my alpha cells and my beta cells. So my alpha cells is going to create glucagon. And my beta cell is going to create insulin. These are related to glucose metabolism, or how I get glucose in and out of my cells. So insulin brings glucose into, so increase glucose in cells, therefore it decreases glucose in the blood. So it brings down your blood sugar. Glucagon is going to do the opposite. Glucagon increases the glucose in the blood by taking it out of the cells. So therefore it decreases the glucose in. So they kind of regulate each other, and that's all happening in the pancreas. We'll talk again more about these things in lab. If you have any questions, let me know.